So I want to thank you all for joining us this morning, particularly the students from the Met who I've been able to engage with through various projects and programs earlier this semester. I also want to acknowledge Mr. Farmer, who has been a big supporter of the Center's education initiatives, particularly the Civil Rights Movement Initiative, so thank you for joining us. To start, my name is Maiyah Gamble-Rivers, and I'm the Manager of Programs and Public Engagement here at the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice at Brown University. During the next hour, I want to spend time with our panel thinking about education at the local level. In 1974, during a Q&A segment at UC Berkeley, James Baldwin was asked a question about the state of education in America, in which he gave a very poignant response. He said, "If you want to talk about education in America, you must talk about the society in which it fails to occur. You cannot talk about schools without talking about the cities in which they exist." All of us sitting at this round table have gone through the Providence Public School system and are a current student. And speaking for myself, I often sense that we, the students, were the least important part of the institution. With that being said, I want to take this time to introduce you to our panelists. To my right, we have Drea Vidal, who is a junior at the Met High School in Providence. She is interested in the fields of criminal justice, medicine, education, and the history of slavery. Drea is currently an intern at the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice. Her research with the center focuses on the history of slavery in Rhode Island and investigates the history of slave ship captain Isaac Hopkins and his legacy in the forms of a local middle school, memorial, and public park. She hopes to help educate current Isaac Hopkins Middle School students about the history of slavery in the state and on the historical figure in which their school is named after. Drea plans to submit a petition to the city to change the school name in the next year. In addition, Drea has been working with undergraduates in Choices program to develop mini lessons for high school students on the carceral state. Sara Jackson is a 2018 graduate of Hope High School, my alma mater, and is currently a sophomore at Providence College. She's a double major in English literature and women's studies with a minor in public community service. Sarah is invested in community engagement and education. Her participation in the Civil Rights Movement Initiative at CSSJ sparked her interest in urban education experiences and the methodical use of integration. Her experience at a predominantly white institution grants her the opportunity to see the firsthand effects of one-way integration and the many inconsistencies throughout the history of education. Her past involvement with community programs such as City Arts, Breakthrough Providence, and Planned Parenthood STARS has given her the opportunity to see the impact of interactive and personal relationships in educational settings on multiple levels. Casandra Inez is a Providence native and resident. She began her work with youth as a mentor at City Arts, then as a studio assistant at New Urban Arts, and eventually a tutor and program assistant at Youth in Action. As education became her focus, she moved away from after-school programming and towards the high school classroom. She spent 2 years at the Met High School and completed her student teaching at Mount Pleasant High School and Allen Shawn Feinstein Middle School in Coventry. September 2019 was the start of her third year as an English language arts educator in Providence. Casandra is also the co-founder of a community art gallery, shop, and space in the Olneyville neighborhood. Aleita Cook has been an organizer, activist at Providence Student Union for 5 years. She currently is a part of an ongoing lawsuit to win civics education in Rhode Island and was featured on The Daily Show. Aleita is the first in her family to graduate from high school and go to college. In addition to Providence Student Union, she has worked with local community groups such as PRISM, Arise, and Youth Pride. Aleita attends college at CCRI and majors in communication, film, and media arts. Please join me in welcoming our guest. So I didn't want this next hour to be a standard panel with presentations, but more of a conversation that you would have around your kitchen table. I also want to shape this next hour with some educators in mind, and I want to start our conversation with Septima Clark, a South Carolina educator, civil rights activist, and creator of the Citizenship Schools to increase literacy and Black voting. Clark, quote, believed unconditionally in the ability of people to respond when they are told the truth, that we need to be taught to study rather than to believe, to inquire rather than affirm. And thinking about youth activism throughout history and the ways young people have used existing pathways like the law and education to demand their rights. I'm hoping that we can spend some time talking about youth activism in the city of Providence. What has history taught you about that work, and if so, how has youth activism been crucial to your education, your teaching, and what are youth in the city currently responding to? I'll turn it over to you guys.
Okay. So as I do the work at the center, I've kind of been focusing more on activism in general, not youth activism specifically, but from experience with seeing social media, youth seem to use their social media and peers as an outlet to kind of get their message across and kind of tackle any problem. And it's kind of the ripple effect of social media and conversations with peers and people who have the same goal. So right now, I am, as Maiyah mentioned, I am focusing on changing the Isaac Hopkins Middle School name. And so I'm using my peers as an outlet as well. And I'm kind of trying to tackle the problem of racism through my work at the center. And a way that I'm doing it is through, my peers and social media and kind of educating the people around me to know what is happening right now in this world. And the more people are aware, the more the message will get across and the ripple effect will continue. So that's my outlook on it.
So I graduated from the Providence school system about 13 years ago, and during my whole education, public education, I never felt the need to go out and protest or fight against something. I always felt pretty safe and comfortable. And now as an educator in Providence, what I see, I think our youth are definitely passionate, and when we look at history, that's what you see, and that's what we continue to see when we watch the news, especially with the current climate, with youth fighting against or bringing more attention to and sharing their feelings about the world and the future, especially with climate change and global warming and that sort of thing. And in Providence, on a more local level, a few years ago, we had a big walkout where students protested. But more often, what I see in my classroom and my personal experience with youth now is that they feel very distant from that activism. Even with their peers who do go out and protest, whether it was the walkout this year or the walkout 4 years ago, they feel like they need more allies or more support, and they're hesitant to participate. And so when we're looking at the news, we see a lot of youth who are the face of these things, but what's not being broadcasted or shown is those students who are more hesitant, and we're not talking about the reasons why. And sorry, I'm fighting a cold.
Sarah or Aleita?
From my point of view, right now I'm a sophomore at Providence College, and a lot of the times we're always talking about things that we know are wrong with the world, and we know we want to change, and even just subtle injustices in our own communities, with NPC. And then we have, so for example, this is so perfect that this actually just happened. Our dining hall has terrible food. We find honestly, sorry, like parasites in our food, glass in the yogurt, like I don't know what they're doing there. But so there's been a petition going around, and they finally decided to acknowledge us, and they're like, okay, we'll have discussions, we'll get better at it. And I have this friend, and he's like, look, that only took 2 days. Imagine what we can do if we like try to fight the injustices that are going on in our own schools, particularly like within the education department, and just like the slight microaggressions that we all feel day to day. And he's like, let's start a petition. And we're all like, what is a petition gonna do about? Like, it's two different levels. And I think that what's been happening lately is, at least in my community, all we've been doing is talking about things and discussing things and acknowledging that things are wrong. But it's hard to figure out what actions, because everything that we think of, like a petition, seems so small to go against a bigger system. And I think that when you think of youth activism, it was actions that kind of made it happen, but it was also the discussions behind the doors. So I think that right now our discussions are very important, and you can see it, like she said, throughout social media, where people are discussing things and everyone is aware of what's going on, and we're all getting the news and we're all seeing what's happening, and we're shouting our injustices in the comments and to our friends. And I think that's a very important part of youth activism specifically, because so many of us don't really know what's going on. So it's important to just have conversations and like figure out what's going on from not just your perspective, but everyone's perspective around you. And then it'll broaden out, like she said, a ripple effect once you begin to speak about it. But I've seen that there's a lack of us actually knowing how to go about change, because the climate change politically has changed. Everything's changed from the last time youth activism, the civil rights movement, like impacted the world in a huge way, and we're kind of at a loss at where to go from now. But I still think the conversations we're having are important, and I just know that they'll never be enough in actually making change.
Well, I guess from my experience, I've been an organizer since like my sophomore year of high school, and the one thing that I tried to do was educate a lot of students in my grade, which wasn't like the best. It was obviously kind of hard, but I feel like the one thing that a lot of students kind of attract to is direct action. So like what all you guys just said was having discussions and having social media, having stuff on social media where kids have those discussions and have a type of action and have allies to back them up. And I feel like that's what a lot of youth orgs do, especially in Providence that I know of, where I know students can go to and be like, I have this problem at school where this teacher didn't respect my pronouns and then didn't call me by my desired name. And orgs like PSU or PRISM or YPI, which is Youth Pride Inc., try to fix those problems and try to hold those teachers accountable, because that's what a lot of students feel like they can't really speak up in the injustices in their schools because they're scared of getting suspended or expelled or detention, or even failing because this teacher feels a type of way or the school feels a type of way and they think they can get away with it. So I feel like the main thing is I feel like students feel like they have a voice, but like you guys, my last panelist said, that they don't feel like they have allies to back them up. So I feel like that's what we have to do, make sure these students feel like they have people to go to and have these conversations, but also try to hold these teachers accountable for their actions without them, I guess, facing the consequences for speaking up. But yeah.
Thank you. I want to return to novelist, playwright, and activist James Baldwin. And in his 1968 appearance on The Dick Cavett Show, in his response to a Yale professor, Baldwin talks about the evidence, arguing that schools, textbooks, and the curriculum that is given to students of color all speak to an idealism of America, but one that students of color never see. The thing that students are taught in the classroom do not match the world that they have to navigate on a daily basis. One of the things that the 1619 report, conceptualized by Nicole Hannah-Jones, does is call for a reframing of our national history curriculum, moving our nation's founding from 1776 to 1619. The 1619 report and its educational resources serve as a critique of our nation's founding social and institutional structure and how that structure, which is rooted in racial slavery and violence, is inextricably tied to our present. In trying to reshape the national curriculum, are we just trying to keep the nation intact by getting our young people to see themselves as American? Curriculum is used as a tool to preserve the nation and produce good citizens that love America. How has learning a more complete and truthful history shaped your understanding of the stated American ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Knowing this history, how have you wrestled with the ideas of America versus the evidence in your education?
Well, for me, I feel like knowing the history of America, I just feel like that phrase, what you said about like having like
Life, liberty, and the pursuit
yeah,
of happiness.
I just feel like that is kind of like a hypocritical statement, because there's the south side of Providence who is not living, who is not happy, who is not like doesn't have liberty or like cannot relate to any of that statement or anything what America stands for as far as like freedom and like this is like a free country. Some people, there are a lot of black men who are incarcerated for something that they didn't even do or a minor offense. They're not free, you know, and people like, and I just feel like when I think of America, I just feel like it's just hard to just be proud of this country when I just see what they do to my community and what they have been doing to my ancestors for years now. And I just feel like I just can't, it's just hard going through the day without having that on your mind and just having that, just seeing what's around you, you know. So I just feel like that statement is kind of just hypocritical to me when it's only working one way in this country. It's only working for one way for one race. So, yeah.
Okay. For me, it's really opened my eyes by doing research that goes way back to slavery and then to when slavery was abolished and how they still kind of used slavery in different forms to kind of keep people from being free. But they would cover it up with imprisonment or incarceration. And when you think of the United States, we're the land of the free, and I make the little bunny ears because we're not free. There are many people who aren't free. There's the Native Americans simply, the incarcerated, wrongfully incarcerated, and even when people are formerly incarcerated and they get out of prison, they still don't have the rights that everyone else has. They still don't have the voting rights. They still go through those obstacles that keep them from being free and being equal to everyone else. And when we think going way back to when we became the land of the free, and you think of the United States and the Pledge of Allegiance, we all, in public schools, we all kind of, it was mandatory for us in the morning to get up, put our hand on our chest, and say the Pledge of Allegiance. And in the Pledge of Allegiance, it says liberty and justice for all, and that is kind of another hypocritical statement because there isn't justice for all, and there's no liberty or freedom for everyone in the United States. And I think just doing just simply research, and even in the current events that are happening today, you can clearly see that we're not, the world, the United States is not a happy place, and it's not a free place, and it's not a liberal where people can just, you know, be them and have that equality and that unity. So to me, I agree that it's a hypocritical statement, and we're kind of, not us, but the world, the United States, kind of trying to cover up the unfreedom that we don't have. So yeah, that's me personally.
I think as I learned more about the world itself, like in high school, you only learn about, like, in terms of Black history, from slavery to the civil rights to Obama. Maybe now they might teach about him. But like when you start learning a little bit more and you go a little bit past slavery and you learn about how they got here and what happened before then, and you stop learning about history and context of America and the world and just the world itself. Because I think that what the curriculum has been so far is just how the world relates to us and how we've affected the world, and like that's the story. Like it's all about European conquest and like their troubles and struggles, and there's so much more to the world that you don't even think about until you meet other people who are part of that world, and you're like, oh, that's what's happening over there. Like you have no clue. My friend says that like South America does not exist in American curriculum. Like we don't exist. Like Egypt, every place except for Europe, America, Russia, and like that's the area. You can like picture it on the map, and it's like there's a whole other like 2 continents that we don't even talk about. And I think that affects how we see the world in terms of you have a selfish view on the world where you're not thinking about what else is going on. And once you start opening your mind to that, I think that it's easier to accept terms of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness because you can move it out of the context of America. I think that like, for me, the curriculum that we're learning now, there's no chance to ever get close to those ideals that America wants us to hold because we're not learning about history that affects us the most. Because, I mean, America's from day one has been the land of immigrations, and I don't know why no one can see that. And it's like the world is there's so many different people on this land that it's impossible to only talk about Europe because they're not the only ones that traveled here. They're not the only ones that have been affected by European people, and they're not. So it's like it's such a tangled up concept that I don't understand why we only learn about it in one way. And that's the idea of like from day one, it's always been what I've been discussing more in like my own studies at school, like this one-way integration where we're never talking about what the other people could be doing or where we could be going. It's always just a transference of power between the dominant and not the submissive, but in the minorities. So yeah, I think that until we can start opening, and I mean from high school, I'm just learning about it now, and I think that it's sad that I'm just learning about things, and I'm a college student. I should have been learning about South America when I was learning about Europe and those other countries that we all learn about in high school and even elementary school. I think that it can start that young, and if you start that young, it's easier to start accepting bigger ideas outside of the world you live in. And once you start doing that, you can start gaining empathy with other people. And I think that's the biggest thing that's missing in curriculum, empathy. Like we all just teach it from a book, but it's actually people's lives, and you start realizing that where you're like, this is like somebody's living this life, someone has experienced this. And when you start learning about people that are like you like that, it's easier to empathize. So like me learning about, I'm an African American, I don't know anything about Africa. Learning about Africa for me is simply just being like someone somewhere down in my line experienced this. For example, like the scramble for Africa. Like countries literally went to Africa and said, you can take the East, I'll take the West, let's break this up, and just conquered land. But it's like people were living on that land, and those people were my people. And it's hard to come to terms with that, where you literally are thinking like, wow, like that happened to someone that is in my bloodline, and I'm affected by that, and I don't even know that I'm affected by that. And you know you're affected by that because you learn it and you have empathy for those people. And then once you learn to have empathy for yourself, it's easier to have empathy for others. And I think that if we change our curriculum in that way, it'll be easier for the world to change too. And I think it really does start with how we're teaching students and what we're teaching students from day one, like from kindergarten. I don't think it needs to start in college, which I think is the idea now. Like, oh, you learn about big things and the world in college, but that literally doesn't make sense to me. because it limits yourself. So.
So as a public educator, I am already working in a system that was not meant for me. And I knew that going in. And I feel like there are ways around that, and what I picture education to be, I try to do that within my classroom. But it's hard because the students I work with know the same thing, right? They know that, or they feel that the system wasn't meant for them and it wasn't created with them in mind. And we're constantly reminded of that with the new things that they try to implement with curriculum, evaluations, requirements for graduation, and things like that, and especially with the 40% of the public school students are immigrants, mostly of Hispanic heritage. We're struggling to provide them with what they need. And we're super behind on that. And if you've been following what's been going on in Providence, you know, the DOJ has recognized Providence as a very bad place to be right now in our schools. And I think working with students who already, so I teach 10th grade English, and you know, by the time they get to me, they have already kind of given up or have lost all faith in the system. And, you know, we have those conversations, you know, every day, whether it's part of my lesson or not. You know, you talked about the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't have a flag in my classroom, and we don't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And that's just, my classroom didn't come with a flag, so it's not like that's my personal choice. But I didn't put a flag in there. No one came and put a flag in there, so my classroom doesn't have one, and so we don't stand, you know, my students, when we meet first period, whoever I have, we don't stand and do that, and I don't really know what goes on in other classrooms. But even listening to it on the loudspeaker every day and looking at the students that I have in front of me, it just doesn't match up, and they don't feel like this is an allegiance that they can repeat or feel that, or really think about what it means for them. And so I think, you know, change doesn't start with everyone. It has to start with one person. So I talk about what happens in my classroom and what I see, and it's hard to get out of that and see what other people are doing. You know, I'm in the system, but I get the news the same way most people do, right? With the takeover of the Providence Public School systems, we don't know what that means, and we're in a fog. And students feel that they know that, but it's kind of been like this rumbling that has been building up because we've been failing them for so long, and I feel like the students knew that before the news did.
Thank you. In the same vein, that history of slavery is not properly taught, neither is Reconstruction in America, a critical time in history where newly freed blacks were finally able to marry, learn how to read, and participate in state legislature. Many of the black political gains of Reconstruction were reversed through customs, laws, and violent intimidation. In the chapter, The Propaganda of History, Du Bois speaks of an implicit ignorance when it comes to the realm of civics. And in the words of Du Bois, students will complete their education without any ideas of the part in which the black race has played in America. In 1964, we see a significant shift in civics, in which many young people take up the call to action in the Mississippi Delta and register as many black voters as possible. Radical freedom schools were also created at this time, very much engaging with these ideas of freedom. So within the context of history, civic engagement, and the call to action, how do we create room for a radical education? How do we create engaged citizens? Has there been a moment inside or outside of the classroom where you have been encouraged or supported to engage politically or with the civics of the state, of the country, and how have these past examples, if any, inspired you?
Well, for me, I feel like I was fortunate enough to have, before I graduated, feel like I was fortunate enough to have two supportive teachers. One of them I had my sophomore year. She's now the state representative, which I gladly look up to her. She's like one of my favorites to this day. Um, so she always pushed me to. She knew I was a part of the Providence Student Union, and she always pushed me to tell me to keep fighting and keep doing what I'm doing because I'm doing something great. Um, and so did my English teacher, who was part of the teachers union, and told me the same thing of like just keep doing what I'm doing. Um, and I'm glad that they always told me to do that because I never really had somebody told me to do that. Well, besides like my family members and stuff, but it means a lot when you see like adults telling you to do what you're doing and telling you that you're powerful because it makes me feel like I can like I am actually. I know it sounds silly, but it makes me feel like I can be something. You know what I mean? Because after generations of, um, constant predominantly white teachers telling predominantly black students that they're not going to be nothing, or constant negativity they hear throughout the social media, throughout the day. It's refreshing to hear adults say like, you're powerful, um, and what you're doing is something that can change lives or can make history, and I feel like if students have that encouragement every day, I feel like there'll be so much powerful students out in the streets doing what they had to do, so many powerful students up in the state house making noise or out in the streets making noise. And I feel like now, and sometimes, yeah, in America, but even in other countries, there's a lot of students and even a lot of, well, I shouldn't say students, but a lot of young people out there making noise because they don't like their government and how it's run. So they're out there, thousands of students and thousands of young people out there making noise, and it just makes me feel like we should be doing the same, especially here in America. And there are, but I feel like there should be more. Um, but yeah, I just feel like if we just have more um, adults encouraging students and supporting students, but also not, taking charge, making sure they're in the front lines and they're doing the work, but just being on the sidelines and encouraging them, especially the young people of color. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Unfortunately, in middle school, I didn't have that support system in the sense of me having a voice or any of my peers or adolescents having a voice. Going back to even when Donald Trump was first elected, we had a walkout. So the majority of Providence schools, we all said that we were gonna walk out and we're gonna kind of protest we're walking out because we believe this person shouldn't be in office because he isn't right for our government. And even then, back in Nathaniel Green Middle School, we weren't allowed to walk out. If we walked out, there would be consequences. So I think even just that simple thing of us not being able to stand up for what we believe in and having those adults and those authority figures saying that we cannot use our voice for what is right. And thankfully I had a good transition into high school, and I go to a school where the Met, where they do support you and they do let you know that you can have a voice and you can make a change and you can stand up for what you believe in. And fortunately enough, I have Becky as an advisor, and she in advisory, not all advisories do this, but in advisory we do work on kind of problems in the world, and we do we do notice the current events and the things that are wrong, even in other places like South America or other places where it's not more known. And I think that having more adults and authority figures saying that we can use our voice for something good would kind of, like she said, make us feel like we can be something, and it makes us feel good. And just the other day, my social worker, she said that the work that I'm doing at the CSSJ is really important work, and that she wants to bring the workshops that I'm hoping to be doing to East Bay campus, the Met East Bay campus, and kind of to other high schools. And just her saying that to me made me realize, oh, like, I have a voice. What I'm doing is important, and it can make a difference to other students, and it can lead other generations and be that ripple effect for other generations to become leaders and have their voice and use their voice. I just think that in schools or in environments that people aren't fortunate enough to have the support system that I have or the Met has, I think it's good for, I think we need to have these teachers and just the authorities, these adults and authority figures saying that we can do something, we can have a call to action plan, and we can make a difference, even if it's a slight one. Because when you see someone standing up for what they believe in, it's a ripple effect, and you're like, oh, they're doing it, I can do it too. I can be a part of what they're doing, and even if it's making one difference or signing a petition that could make a difference, it is something that could lead to bigger things. And I just think that the support system is really weak in public schools and just in the system in general. And we need to have the more call to action plan and kind of having that support system where they're letting us know that we can be heard and we can use our voice for something positive. So yeah.
Sarah.
I think when I think of how we can bring radical education and kind of changing around the way that we teach education, I think of these two classes I'm taking. So I'm a women's studies double major with English and a PSP minor. And I'm specifically those majors because I've taken classes that have made me, had changed the way I'm thinking, and those classes are women's studies and PSP. And in both of those classes, they kind of challenged the way that, like, the ideological views, ideological views that are held over the world. I mean, obviously in women's studies, it's surrounded around gender and race and things like that. PSP, though, it challenges the ideas of service in education and how communities are working together and what is community and how are we presenting community and how do people interact with communities. And for me, it makes me think, like, not just in terms of like, oh, I'm volunteering or things like that, but it makes me think of like communities within classrooms and how there's always this distinction of teacher and student, and it never allows for students to kind of question what the teacher is teaching. In the classes I am now, that's what they allow us to do. We question what we're reading, and it's like, okay, but how do we feel about this? And I think actually getting a student's opinion on what they're teaching is the first step in changing completely what we're doing, because it allows room for change if you're like, okay, but what do you actually think about this? And do you think that, for instance, I'll use the example of service, do you think that service people should start their basis with friendship? And that started a huge debate because they're like, no, there should be boundaries between service and the people you're servicing. And it's like, but why should there be a boundary between communities? Because that is what you're doing when you're helping someone else. You're joining their community, and what should be happening is you should be looking around, talking to the people in the community, seeing what they need help with, having that conversation and allowing a flow of conversation. But what's actually happening is people being like, this is what you need. And you see that in education a lot, where it's, this is what we should be teaching you because this is the curriculum and this is what you need to be smart and this is what you need to be knowledgeable about the world. But as we can see, it's not what we need. And I think that everyone is aware it's not what we need. And we have like the Johns Hopkins report that's seeing that obviously what we're teaching is not engaging the students. It's not teaching anyone. No one's succeeding. So like, it's been years that we've been teaching the same kind of curriculum, and they tweak it a little bit, and then they tweak it some more, but it's always the same standard and the same structure. And I think that if we start challenging that structure, specifically within the communities in a classroom, so teachers opening up the conversation to like, this is what the book says, how do you guys feel about it? What do you know about it that maybe I didn't teach you yet? Like, have you discussed it outside of class? Like actually acknowledging that students are humans with brains, and we are seeing things and we're experiencing things. Like, from the moment we're born, everyone's a sponge, and every single experience that we have affects the way we think and the things we see. And now we have social media where we're getting exposed to things outside of American culture, and we're not acknowledging the changes that are happening in the world, and we're stuck in this form of education that I think doesn't allow for the sponges that we are to expand and to like realize that there is not one set of education that is the correct form, and that education should be flowing and moving and changing as we grow, because the more we grow, the more like history that goes into the history that we're teaching. Because like, if you think of history, it's always a back and forth thing. Like, slavery is still affecting us now, the civil rights movement is still affecting us now. Like, when you think about Black history, it's not just like what's happening now. It's like every single thing that we've experienced affects how we're living our lives now, because it affects how people think. And like the idea that we're actually thinking while we're learning should be more prevalent in our information, instead of just like writing down what we're learning. And I think that I've had a lot of classes that have had that structure of education, and that's why I know that it works, because I've had classes that they've allowed me to open up and challenge what I'm being taught, and it's allowed me to see that there are two different ways that we're being taught right now. We kind of need to choose a side.
I think when students are resistant, it's pretty powerful, and I don't know if they understand how powerful that is. And they may not see that as activism, but when I reflect on my practice, it's pretty impactful. All of my teacher training and school experience is under the same umbrella. And so when I thought of going into education and thinking of myself as an educator, I always thought I would tweak what I do within the system I'm in. But every day when a student poses a question or resists something that I'm trying to give them, it makes me reflect and think, they have more radical ideas of education that I'm not even aware of or haven't thought of yet. And it's definitely a lead I'd like to follow, because it's they're the future, right? And I think it's very important to, take them seriously and see it not as just defiance, but them telling you that this isn't what they need and that this isn't right. And, if they're not engaging, that's, their protest.
Thank you. So I want to turn our discussion to Carter G. Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro. Woodson asks, when do we bring forth the race problem? Stating teachers cannot ignore the fact that the race question is being brought before Black and white children on a daily basis, in their homes, in the streets, through the press. How then can schools ignore the duty of teaching the truth while other agencies are playing up falsehoods? I think an equally important question is, how do we prepare young people to engage with this complex history? For example, what does it mean for educators to assign a segment of the new Jim Crow? How do you help students navigate both the written articulation of this history versus the lived experience? Or what does it mean to be a student at Isaac Hopkins Middle School and suddenly learn that your school is named after a slave ship captain heavily involved in the slave trade? It is important to tell students a more honest, nuanced history, one that does not simply address oppression and ignore a history of immense resistance. Currently, our schools are not equipped or structured to responsibly handle these histories. What would you need as students and as educators to grapple with this history in your schools or in community spaces?
I think this question brings me back to what I was saying earlier about teaching history with empathy. I think that empathy is one of the most important things that people can gain, especially when talking about the history that that's still affecting us today. Like, you learning about the horrors that are done to human beings, like I think that changes the narrative, and I think we always refer to them as slaves because that was their label, but acknowledging that, like, maybe sometimes acknowledging that they're humans, like, this was a woman named this, like, and when you learn about things in history, like, I'm learning about, like, African folk tales, and, like, that's something that they wrote, like, somebody wrote this, created this, and, like, recognizing the human behind the things that we're reading would really help. Like, it's going to be impactful, and I think that opening up the conversation in that way, like, this is something that may affect you, like, in that type of, it's not a warning sign, but it's just acknowledging the truth, because it's a hard truth to handle, like, the realities of not just from slavery, but from every moment since slavery that has been against us. Like, you just learn small things that happen. Like, has anyone heard of, like, Zulu sticks? You ever heard of those things? They're like margarita, like the straws, swizzle sticks, yeah. And you put them in drinks, and they were in the shape of African American women in different stages of their lives. So they're in the shape of an African woman with her boobs and butt, like, it's the shape of her, but they have her when she's like 15, 21, 25, 50, 70. Like, you can see them. And, like, in some of them, you see her aging. And then we were doing research on this, me and my friend, yesterday. And if you look on their necks, there's actually a noose around their necks. And these were sold in the 60s. And they're still getting sold today on eBay as artifacts. This is what it was called. I forgot the name, but they're still getting sold today. And it's like, when you start learning things, like, it's still happening today, so it's still affecting us. Like, you learn about that and you're like, how in the world could that happen? Like, who let that get created? It was actually getting sold. It's still getting sold. Like, it's heartbreaking, and it's literally disgusting. And I think that you have to acknowledge that in history. Like, I feel like now when you learn about the civil rights movement and slavery, it's become like just a history book. But, like, that's not just, it's not a story. It's, like, something that actually happened, and acknowledging that and holding empathy for that, and, like, opening that type of environment up when talking about it. I love circle talks in classrooms. Like, I think that everyone getting in a circle, and that's the type of environment I think needs to be held for this type of education, because it's so sensitive, because you see it around you every day, like Black boys getting shot by cops that are getting off, and people are striving for justice for the cops, and it's like, but somebody just died, and it's not like we're not getting allowed to get into places. Like, no, people are dying still. Like, yes, we fixed that problem, but we still have this problem, but we can't fix the problem completely until everyone is educated on it, and you can't teach that education without empathy.
In my opinion, there isn't a specific way or method to bring to students or to anyone to kind of grapple with the hardships that come with the history and the current things that are happening in modern day. Everything is individualized. So one student can can read The New Jim Crow and take it a different way than another student has. It could affect someone more than it affects the teacher, or more than it affects the white person in the classroom or the African American person in the classroom. The stories are still being here today. Everyone is going to react to it in a different type of way and have their own message and their own thing that comes out of it. And I think just simply saying, just as she said, just like, oh, like, this is what's going to be told, and this, like, it is a warning that, like, this is something that's hard to deal with. And I think just giving students the warning signs is kind of like the only thing that can really be done, because you can't prepare yourself for something like that. And for me personally, I'm not going to say, like, I have thick skin, but I mentally prepare myself, and I know what I'm going into when I do the research on slavery or police brutality today, or the stories of the incarcerated now, or wrongfully incarcerated, or just simply on Isaac Hopkins. It all shocks me, but it's something that's hard to deal with, and I'm like, wow, this is reality, and this is actually happening today, and it did happen back then, but it's still happening in different forms today, and they're using it as a way to kind of cover up, like I said, cover up the fact that we're not free and we're not united. And I just think that I think students can have a choice in kind of the way that things should be taught, like the history lessons or the hard to deal with things. There are ways to kind of get a message across or get something across without having to show or having to go through what is actually happening. So if there's like a video or an image that's like really like disturbing or hard to look at, I think there are ways to break things down into kind of being able to be blunt about it and get the message across, like, oh, this happened, and it's still happening, and this is what happened, but kind of not being able to embrace the hardships that the same person went through or the same situation that's happening, and also having that empathy and just realizing like this is reality, and that's kind of how it shocks students and people today. Like, this is happening, and it did happen, and it's not like it ended, it's just in different forms. So in my opinion, I don't think that there's a way to specifically kind of prepare yourself or grapple with the hardships of the history that we learn or the things that we're going through in modern day, police brutality, racism. There's no fix to it unless we are all educated on it, and the only way that we can all be educated on it is if we do kind of know that, okay, this is going to be hard to watch or hard to read, but I need to learn it. Like, it's something that's happening and it's important, and I need to understand it before we do that call to action and before I kind of use my peers or educate other people on this topic or on this story or whatever that's being taught. So yeah.
I mean, I feel like I'll have to agree with both of my panelists that going to what she said as far as like learning the history and learning more than just like, I feel like there's more than, I know my ancestors was more than just a slave. You know, they were inventors, they were creators, they were businessmen, you know. I believe back, I don't know the exact date, but there was a Black Wall Street where Black people had their own community and they owned money and they had their own, they were good. Like, they were good until, you know, white people destroyed the community. And most people don't even know that because it's not in history books, you know. So, like, I believe, like, yeah, when it comes to slavery, I feel like, one, there should be a healing process. Because, again, what she says, going back to empathy, people who are, quote-unquote, woke and know about what's going on, they got to learn how to heal because there's generation of depression, the generation of trauma in their blood. You know, I got trauma and depression in my blood because going back down to slavery, you know? So I feel like it starts with a healing process so they can heal within inside, within themselves, but also within their family too. So don't continue to pass down through generation, but also acknowledging it and being proud of, you know, acknowledging the history, but also being proud of it too, because like, obviously not be proud of like the slavery part, but just be proud of like, they were more than slaves, they were more than, you know, the civil rights, they were just more than their suffering, I guess. And I feel like, again, like, I don't know, I feel like just going back to when students are dealing or hearing about slavery and Jim Crow and stuff, I just feel like this goes back down to healing because not a lot of students have those conversations in class. You know, all they know is about slavery and Jim Crow and that's it. But, you know, why not sit down and have a conversation about how that made you feel? How do you, how did you react to it? And how do you want to move forward and how you want to process that? So I just feel like healing process is a big part of it. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
I agree with exactly what you were saying. That's what I thought, that I think we need healing. And I don't know what that would look like. I think it'd be different for everyone, and then we can talk about a more holistic approach to education. But there's this historical figure who's credited with creating this nice little pyramid, but it's common sense, right? We need certain things before we can get to other levels, right? So we need to feel safe. We need to feel confident. We have to be well fed and sleep well and, be healthy before we can start thinking about, this new knowledge that someone's trying to share with you. So, we definitely need to take care of that. And then what I imagine is that we don't need any more systems or takeovers or people coming from out of state telling us what we need. I think we need to uplift our community and our families and have them, because they're the real stakeholders in our education, right? These are their kids. And so I imagine, that would be where we get this approach from, is looking to the communities for it.
One thing you brought up is imagination, which will bring us to our last question. So scholars have spent some time thinking about the prison industrial complex, the school-to-prison pipeline, and the impact on students of color. In the book, We Want to Do More Than Survive, Abolitionist Teaching in the Pursuit of Educational Freedom, scholar Bettina Love speaks on what she calls the educational survival complex, a system in which high-stakes testing place both students and teachers in survival mode, while billions are made for testing in textbooks, industries, and hedge funds, but always leaves families of color struggling to survive. Poor performance on tests label schools and all who fall within their walls as failing, and low test scores threaten educators' livelihood. Students are not encouraged to become lifelong learners, and both are caught in a structural system trying to survive. Arguing that the education system is meant to uphold whiteness and was built on Black suffering, Bettina Love asked readers, how do children with the world in front of them make peace with their suffering? With the fact that they have been rendered disposable inside and outside of the classroom, to have your language and your culture made visible and invisible at the same time. So to close this roundtable, I want to spend some time evoking the imagination. Schools should reveal the truth and not just serve as a space to get out of or to avoid a particular life. But how do educators teach more than educational survival skills? How do both teachers and students get out of this educational survival complex? So my question to you is, if you could implement a lesson into the PPSD curriculum, what would that lesson look like? And what does the classroom need to look like? Is there something that you're already doing?
I feel like for me, I don't know, I wasn't thinking about this question. I feel like for me, like, it just has to be, again, going back to like healing, because when you do education, or when some students have they have different levels of learning, and sometimes learning could be difficult for them. So I feel like if I was a teacher and I'll implement a lesson, I'll make sure it's very engaging, as in like something that they want to learn, and something that gets them I want to learn more, and but also it's at their learning level, so everybody understands. Not a couple students understand, and half of the class is like, I don't know what to do. So it's like it fits everybody's learning ability, but also it's not like it makes them not want to I guess it's motivational and makes them want to stay engaged, but it encourages them to, want to be more, want to do more, and want to learn more. So I feel like my lesson would probably just be super engaging, and fits everybody's learning ability, I guess. Hopefully that answers the question. But yeah.
As a current high school student, to me, personally, I find things more engaging when it's hands-on, or not just necessarily hands-on, but not just like, here's a paper, let's read. Like, here's a worksheet, read that. We learned this and this. What's your response? I think just like even with the mini lessons that I'm creating for high school students, I'm not using worksheets, and I'm not kind of just giving them the information and just here, there's your information, do whatever you want with it. I think when you're implementing a lesson, you have to take in what the students, their voice, and how they would kind of, how they would kind of take in and be more engaged with it more. In my opinion, worksheets don't engage me at all, and they bore me. And as some of my peers and my friends that we've talked about, you can't just give someone a worksheet and expect them, and like give them a lesson or teach them something or have them read something and expect them to just like, oh, okay, I read this, let me respond, and that's it. I think we have to have a discussion and do even like an activity, watch videos. You know, you have to engage your students, and you have to kind of switch the student-teacher role and let them have their voice be heard in how they're taking in what you're teaching. I think that, what was I going to say? I think that, what's the word? I don't know how to word it. I think that teachers don't kind of take in how we learn and the way that our learning strategies go, and us having a voice. Like before I started creating my lessons, I asked a couple of my peers, I'm doing this, like, how would you guys want to learn? Like, what would be more engaging to you guys? And I was told activities. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be doing activities. And I think we have to but I think we have to have a call to action plan all the time. And it's because when you get, like, if, let's say we did do a worksheet, or even if it was an activity or a video that we watched, what are you going to do with the information that we were just given? It's not just like, okay, wow, I just learned about police brutality. I just learned about this person who just got shot. And, okay, I'm going to go home and go tell my mom about it. And that's it. And then I'm going to go take a nap. I think it's like, oh, we just learned this. What can we do to fix this problem? And even though we can't fix racism, or we can't fix those bigger problems by just saying this is wrong and kind of just getting it out there that, like, this is happening, I think we have to actually have a sit-down discussion or a circle discussion and let our thoughts and be known. And I just think that the way, like, teachers, when you're teaching a lesson, you have to take in how your students are gathering the information and what's being done with the information that you're giving them. And you can't just give them information and expect them to, like, what do you expect them to do with the information? Do you just teach a lesson and, okay, class is over, go to your next one? I think there has to be some sort of discussion and some sort of agreement, some sort of debate, or just your thoughts, what your opinions are on this topic or this situation. And in just engaging your students in the way they learn, so having their voice be heard and switching the role from teacher to student. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
When you're becoming a teacher in Rhode Island, a high school teacher, you have to choose a content area. And so I was up between English and history. But I couldn't commit to implementing the current history curriculums in my classroom, so I went with English. But I think what the ideal lesson would be, it wouldn't be from me. I think the students would really get more out of research and conversations with other people in their city. And, I didn't know that Isaac Hopkins owned a slave ship until just now. And I went there for middle school, and just learning about what's right in front of them, like where do these names come from, why or when were these structures built and for who, and just learning those things with real life context, I think would have a bigger impact than anything I could ever teach them.
I think if I were to be able to put a lesson plan into the curriculum that we have right now, I want to learn about a country or a people that have nothing to do with European conquest or the Europeans or anything at all to do with America or Europe or anything like that, because I think that that's what we've already been learning. And even just throwing in one lesson plan that is just about that country and their history and what's going on, because like that country has an entire history just as long as ours. It's not like they've just been created. They've been there as long as we have, and things have happened there that have shaped their land. And I think that having a lesson plan where it's just learning about that, I think even for that, it'd be like realistically, it'd be easy to actually like add that into curriculum. Like we can teach it the same way with history books, sure. I'd like to get away from that type of learning, but to start, I'd love to just have a chance for students to learn about something outside of the European narrative.
So please join me in thanking our panelists and for sharing their experiences with us. I know we're cutting it really close, but we will open up the floor for Q&A. If folks have a few questions that they want to ask, there's mics on either side of the room. So the mics are there.
Can I just talk loudly?
We need to have the mic for accessibility purposes.
Hi, thank you all very much. So my kids actually graduated from Isaac Hopkins and are now in high school. And one of the things that I have noticed about their experience is that even though their peers are probably 85 to 90% students of color, the teachers are probably the reverse, probably maybe 15% teachers of color. So I would just be interested to hear either what your guys' experience was of that as students, or what you think about the impact of having mentors and teachers who are folks of color and who look more like the students that they're teaching.
So as Maiyah mentioned, I'm trying to put into lessons about carceral state, and so something that actually I've done research on is school to prison pipeline, and a fact that I learned, it changed as the years went on. So like now it's probably a higher number, but I learned that 71% of prison guards are white, and 61% of teachers in Rhode Island public schools are white as well. But that was in 2016, I believe, so the number probably has risen. For me personally, I've had one teacher of color in middle school. In elementary school, I had no teachers of color. Even till this day, I used to intern there, and they're all white teachers. And at the Met, we do have some colored teachers or staff members, but the majority are white, and I think that's just Rhode Island in general. Is the majority of teachers and even authority figures are not people of color, and I think that number is rising. The number of white authority figures or just white teachers or anything in general is rising over the years, and I think that's a problem that we need to tackle. But personally, I literally had one teacher who was a person of color.
I guess like for me, before I moved to Rhode Island, because I moved to Rhode Island when I was 12, but before then, I lived in Brooklyn, New York since I was 4, and ever since then, like I always had a teacher of color, up until my sixth grade. So I always had a teacher of color throughout elementary school, going into middle school, until I came to Rhode Island. And since I came to Rhode Island, I literally only had 2 teachers of color, and 1 teacher of color in middle school, which was my last year, only because of a teacher had passed that year, and he was like a sub, and then 1 teacher in my sophomore year of high school. So comparing that to, and I went to a middle school for a short time that was predominantly white, and literally only, including me and my sister, only 4 black students in that whole school. So as coming from Brooklyn and coming to Rhode Island, that's like a big culture difference, because going to a school in Brooklyn is like mostly students of color, couple, maybe a handful of white teachers. But coming here, it's like, it's weird, because when I was in high school, you see mostly teachers and administrators, mostly white, a handful of teachers of color. But what do you see when you go to lunch, or you're going throughout the day? You see mostly the people of color in the building are lunch ladies or janitors. What does that say when you go into a school that's mostly students of color? They're either going to be incarcerated on the street. That's, mind you, I went to PCTA, so if you know Providence, there's Broad Street that's right there. Mm-hmm. So every morning, that's what you see when you walk, especially if you're walking past Broad Street. You see people who are sick that look like you. You go into school, you see school lunch ladies that look like you, or janitors. What are you gonna think? That's what your people look like, and that's all you're gonna be, right? So it's just like it's all about changing I don't know, I just feel like it just needs to be more teachers of color in schools, and just more representation of people of color that look at us as more than just janitors or lunch ladies, or even people on the street, And it's like, it's kind of sad, and it's like, that's the reality of it, And even when they're officers, they're in the school policing you. Like, what does that say? It's just like all like one big statement. And it's like, when you mention the school to prison pipeline, it's so real. And it's like, you can see it when you walk through the school building. You see it every day. And it's like, it's kind of hard to think, I'm going to be better than what's around me, when that's all you see is around you, and nobody's encouraging you. Nobody's telling you, you're doing great you're doing amazing. Keep going hard, keep pushing, motivating you, So it's just like, it goes back to the saying, it's just like, motivate your students. You just motivate, just motivate young people, because it's hard, especially what you see around you, and just feeling like you're a target just all the time, especially being, a black woman of color, a black woman, and you're just walking down the street, especially what's happening with, sex trafficking and all that stuff. It's just like, you just like feel like you're a constant target. And it's just like, even being a black man, when you're walking down the street and you see cops, you have that automatic fear. That tension. Just people that's in the room, like, that feeling when you walk by a cop. So just like, it's all about just making sure we encourage each other, and especially encourage young people, let them know, like, you're more than what you see around you. You're better than what you think, and you're powerful. You're very powerful, So it's all about making sure you just encourage one another, but also encouraging our young people, because they're the future. They're going to be, when no offense, but when you guys pass, we're going to be in your footsteps trying to change the world. So it's like they're going to be trying to change in the world, so we got to encourage them, you know. So, yeah, hopefully that's answers your question.
I think so. I've always been in predominantly minority schools, and I think that I didn't realize that all my teachers were white until I got to college, because you're kind of surrounded by people that you see. So like you just see a handful of white people, and like that's it. And then you go to college, and I go to PC, which was rated the most segregated school for the Prince Review like 4 years in a row. They're trying to fix it though. They make us take pictures with white kids. It's great. It's so funny. So I think that like now that I'm in a predominantly white school and there's only a handful of black people around me, when I get a teacher who's a person of color, immediately I feel more comfortable in the class. And it's just like I didn't realize that who the teacher is affects me until I moved out of my very comfortable comfort zone. Because I mean, yes, now I see it's odd that it's a student full of students of color, and all the teachers are white, but that was my experience since I started education. And then you see the transition and you just realize that it actually does affect you. And I can say that like I don't think that it's necessarily like I've had white teachers that I've connected with and have made me feel comfortable in the class because it's just they're a good teacher. But I've also had teachers that I've seen them kind of show their perception of what black people is in the classroom. And I think that's the thing that needs to change. And maybe having teachers of colors in the school would help that perception change, because they are now the colleagues of those white teachers. So that'd be kind of a conversation on their end. I think having white teachers is only a problem when they have a perception about black students that is now forced onto the students. And I think that the only way to really get that tension out of the way is having more people of color as their colleagues that they can converse with, and honestly just realize that like black is not like a species, like it's a human, you know. So I think that's like the transition we need.
Yeah, I think throughout my public school education, most of my teachers have been white, and that was one of the things that drove me to education, and especially to teach in the place where I am from and where I grew up. And every year I begin the year by writing a letter to my students and telling them, you know, a little bit about myself, where I grew up, the neighborhoods I lived in, the schools I went to, and just to let them know that, you know, in my experience, I always thought teacher meant other, you know, that it was a certain type of person that became a teacher, and not just white, but you know, the smart kid in class. They were always the straight A student, and I was not that, and I still became a teacher. But there's this national decline in the profession of teaching, right? We have so many vacancies in Providence. Nobody wants to fill them. Nobody wants to be a teacher. And I think we have to look at why, but also like the certification requirements and who they're approaching for those positions and who they have in mind when they're creating those requirements. And there's just so many levels of, you know, to answer that question. But I think now as a teacher of color, and, you know, having most of my peers be white people, that's not what's wrong. I think we need just more community members involved in education and becoming teachers and reflecting the students they're teaching. You know, historically, it has been white, unmarried young women who have been teachers, right? But also who was this system created for, you know? So all those things are changing. So I think it's just going to be a long time before we get to what education should look like, or, you know, it's teaching, what it should look like.
So thank you again to my panelists, and thank you all for your questions and for sitting through this last hour with us. We hope that you stick around for the remainder of the day. We're going to break for the next hour. Folks can find lunch, Thayer Street. But we will conclude at 1 p.m. with Professor Joy James' panel titled Rethinking Reparations, Calculating the Cost of Prison Slaves, COINTELPRO, and Police State Executions. Thank you.